The exhaustion you feel isn't always coming from what you're doing. Sometimes, you're exhausted by everything you're still carrying. I didn't understand this for a long time. I thought being tired meant I had done too much. Too many things to do. Too many people to think about. Too many decisions. Too many responsibilities waiting for me. So, whenever I felt depleted, I looked at my life and tried to figure out what I could remove. What could I postpone? What could I say no to? What could I make more efficient? What could I organize better? I kept trying to manage the visible things. But there was another list I wasn't looking at. The conversation I knew I needed to have. The thing I was still angry about, even though I told myself I was over it. The decision I had made months ago but still revisited in my head. The relationship that had ended but hadn't really ended inside me. The grief I had acknowledged and then immediately moved past because there were things to do. The dream I had put away and called practical. I wasn't thinking about these things all day. That was the strange part. I could go to work, I could exercise, I could laugh, I could have a perfectly normal day, and still wake up the next morning feeling like something inside me had been running all night. I thought I was tired because I was doing too much. But eventually, I had to ask a different question. What if some of my energy wasn't being spent on my life at all? What if it was being spent on everything I hadn't finished with? The invisible list? In 1927, a Soviet psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in a Vienna cafe when she noticed something that would change how we understand the human mind. Waiters in the cafe had extraordinary memories for open orders that hadn't been delivered yet. They could recall every detail. Table number, items, modifications. But the moment the order was completed and the bill was paid, the information vanished. The waiter couldn't remember a thing. Zeigarnik went back to her lab and spent years studying what she'd seen. What she discovered is this. The human brain holds open tasks in a state of active tension. It doesn't simply file them away and forget them. It keeps them running in the background, continuously consuming resources, demanding attention, waiting for resolution. Not just tasks on a to-do list. Emotional tasks, conversations that never had their ending. Relationships that were left unresolved. Decisions that were made but never fully accepted. Grief that was acknowledged but never moved through. The things you've been meaning to address, the things you've been circling, the things you filed under later for so long that later has become its own permanent residence. And here's what makes this difficult to notice. You don't have to consciously think about something for it to occupy you. You don't have to sit there thinking about the person you never confronted. You don't have to replay the argument. You don't have to consciously remember the decision you regret. The fact that you aren't thinking about it doesn't necessarily mean your mind has finished with it. Sometimes it means you've gotten very good at keeping it just outside your awareness. And that is different. Because something can be out of your conscious attention without being out of your system. Every single one of these unfinished things is running somewhere in the background. Using the energy you thought you had available for your actual life. Stay with me. The kind of tired sleep doesn't fix. I want you to think about the last time you had a full night of sleep and woke up still tired. Not physically tired. That particular mental exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to touch. The kind where you open your eyes and, before you've even gotten out of bed, you already feel behind. Not necessarily because anything has happened. Nothing is on fire. No one is asking anything from you yet. And still, you feel full, as if you've already spent part of the day before the day has even begun. Where do you think that comes from? Most women would probably say, stress. Too much to do, not enough support. The relentlessness of it all. And those things are real. But underneath them, running quieter and deeper than any of that, is something much easier to miss. Your brain is not resting when your body rests. It is processing. And what it's processing, the open loops, the unresolved things, the conversations that didn't end cleanly, the feelings that were started and never finished. Those don't simply pause because you're tired. They remain active. And you can wake up having spent your rest on maintenance. On keeping unfinished things from collapsing into chaos while you slept. I recognized this in myself when I finally stopped long enough to look at it honestly. I had an invisible list. Not the visible one. Not the tasks and appointments and responsibilities. The other one. The person I owed a difficult conversation. The grief I acknowledged but moved past too quickly because life kept going. The decision I made 3 years ago that I still argued with myself about sometimes. The version of a relationship I was still carrying even though the relationship had ended. The thing I wanted to say but kept editing in my head instead. The apology I wasn't sure I wanted to give. The apology I was still waiting for. The person I had forgiven intellectually but hadn't actually stopped protecting myself from the dream I had set aside and told myself was practical wisdom, but was actually fear. None of these things were screaming. That was what made them so easy to underestimate. They were quiet, but quiet doesn't mean free. Every item on that invisible list was using something. Not obviously, not dramatically, quietly, continuously. The way a phone drains battery when you're not using it, background process is running. Lights staying on, keeping things ready that you never actually access. And the energy I thought I didn't have, it was there. It was just already allocated. To the list I'd never written down, what not thinking about it actually costs. There is another part of this that took me even longer to understand. Sometimes I wasn't carrying something because I was constantly thinking about it. I was carrying it because I was constantly trying not to think about it. And those are not the same thing. What neuroscience has found about this is both clarifying and a little confronting. The brain cannot distinguish between this is finished and I've decided not to think about this anymore. Suppression is not completion. Distraction is not resolution. Avoidance is not the same as release. When you push something aside, when you decide you'll deal with it later, when you file it under not now, when you get busy enough that you don't have to feel it, the brain registers none of that as closure. It keeps the file open. And an open file is an active file. Think about how much energy it can take to not think about something. Don't think about the conversation. Don't check the message. Don't remember what happened. Don't feel angry. Don't let yourself miss them. Don't think about what would happen if you actually left. Don't think about the decision. Don't think about the thing you know you already know. Don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. And suddenly, going somewhere else requires effort. Because the thing you're avoiding has become a boundary around your attention. Researchers studying what they call the cognitive load of emotional avoidance have found that the mental energy required to keep something suppressed, to maintain the act of not thinking about it, is often greater than the energy required to simply face the thing. Think about that for a moment. The avoidance can cost more than the confrontation. Not always, not for everything. There are things that genuinely require distance. There are situations where stepping away is the healthiest choice. This isn't an argument for reopening every wound. It isn't an argument for confronting everyone who has ever hurt you. It isn't an argument for forcing yourself to process something before you're ready. It's something quieter. It's an invitation to notice the difference between letting something rest and spending energy keeping something away. Because those can feel identical from the outside. But inside, they are very different. The things we call done. And this is where it gets even more interesting. Sometimes the unfinished thing isn't something we are consciously avoiding. Sometimes we genuinely believe we've dealt with it. We say, I'm over it. I'm fine. It doesn't matter anymore. I've moved on. And maybe, on the surface, we have. But there are things the mind understands intellectually long before the body feels finished with them. You can know a relationship is over and still keep living as if you're waiting for it to restart. You can forgive someone and still organize your entire life around making sure they never have the power to hurt you again. You can make a decision and still spend years internally arguing with the version of yourself who made it. You can accept that something happened and still be carrying the emotional task of wishing it hadn't. You can stop talking about something without ever actually finishing with it. And sometimes the exhaustion isn't coming from the thing itself anymore. It's coming from the distance between what you say is finished and what some part of you is still carrying. That's a different kind of weight. Because now you're not only carrying the original thing, you're carrying the effort of maintaining the story that you're no longer carrying it. Card de áudio aqui menos 4 segundos de silêncio. The question that changed IT. Here's the question that changed something in me when I finally let myself ask it. Not, why am I always tired? But, what am I spending energy to keep at a distance? Not, what am I doing? What am I actively, continuously, consuming resources to avoid? What conversation keeps taking up space because it never happened? What decision keeps returning because some part of me never accepted it? What feeling keeps resurfacing because I keep trying to graduate from it before I've actually experienced it? What version of my life am I still carrying because I haven't admitted that it ended? And maybe most importantly, what am I calling moving on that is actually just moving forward while carrying it? Because those are not the same thing. You can move forward carrying something. People do it all the time. They build careers carrying grief. They enter new relationships carrying old fear. They create beautiful lives while carrying decisions they never fully made peace with. They become incredibly functional. And because they're functional, no one notices the weight. Sometimes they don't notice it either. Until they wake up one morning and realize, I'm tired. Not because my life is wrong. Not because I'm incapable. Not because I'm lazy. I'm tired because I've been carrying things that were waiting for an ending. And that question has a different kind of answer. And that answer points to a different kind of solution. Completion. Not rest, not better time management, not another system for organizing the visible list. Completion, or at minimum, the beginning of completion. The conversation that has been waiting, the grief that hasn't been moved through, the decision that hasn't been accepted, the truth that hasn't been admitted, the thing set aside that hasn't been properly let go. Each one that finds its ending, however imperfect, however incomplete, frees something. Not dramatically, but really. The way a breath releases when you finally stop holding it, you don't notice how much it costs to hold it until you stop. And then you wonder how long you've been breathing like that. Maybe that's why some forms of relief feel almost strange. You don't suddenly become a different person. Nothing magical happens. You simply stop spending energy on something that no longer needs to be held in the same way. And the space it occupied becomes available again. For attention, for curiosity, for desire. For the ordinary things you thought you had somehow lost your ability to care about. For the part of you that isn't constantly monitoring what hasn't been resolved. And this is where I think we misunderstand energy. We imagine energy as something we either have or don't have. As if we wake up with a fixed amount. As if some women simply got lucky and received a larger battery. But maybe energy is not only about how much you have, maybe it's also about where your mind is continuously allocating it. And that changes the question completely. Because if the problem were simply, I'm depleted, then the answer would always be, get more. More sleep, more rest, more time, more discipline, more supplements, more productivity systems, more optimization. But what if the question isn't, how do I create more energy? What if it's, what is using the energy I already have? That is a much more interesting question. Because now you don't have to become someone else. You don't necessarily need to push harder. You may simply need to notice what has been quietly consuming you. Let's talk about the invisible freedom. I'm not going to give you a list of things to complete tonight, because that would miss the point, and probably add another item to the invisible list. What I want to leave you with is simpler. Somewhere inside you, right now, there is something that has been waiting for you to finish with it, not to fix it, not to resolve it perfectly. Not to arrive at some clean conclusion that makes everything make sense. Just to give it your full attention for long enough that it knows you've seen it. A feeling that was started and never allowed to finish. A truth you've known but haven't let yourself fully know. A grief. A decision. A letting go. A relationship that ended externally but is still being maintained internally. A version of yourself that you're still trying to become because you haven't allowed yourself to admit that you don't want that life anymore. Something that has been sitting at the edge of your awareness, patient and waiting. Using a little of your energy every single day just by being there. You don't have to solve it tonight. You don't have to send the message. You don't have to make the decision. You don't have to confront anyone. You don't have to force yourself into some dramatic moment of closure. But you might consider sitting with it long enough to ask, what would it mean to be finished with this? Not healed, not over it, not pretending it didn't happen. Just finished carrying it the way you've been carrying it. Because sometimes completion isn't an ending. Sometimes it's acceptance. Sometimes it's a decision. Sometimes it's finally allowing yourself to feel what you kept postponing. Sometimes it's admitting, I don't want this anymore. Sometimes it's, I still want this, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. Sometimes it's forgiving. Sometimes it's not forgiving. Sometimes it's simply acknowledging, this happened. It mattered. And I don't need to keep spending my life holding it in place. And the energy that comes back when you put something down, even partially, even temporarily, is not small. Because you're not only putting down the thing, you're putting down the work of carrying it. You're putting down the monitoring, the suppressing, the revisiting, the rehearsing, the wondering, the protecting, the pretending, the internal conversations that never happen out loud, the background processes, and suddenly there is something available that wasn't available before. Not because you created more of yourself, because you stopped spending so much of yourself elsewhere. Final revelation. Maybe the exhaustion you've been trying to solve isn't asking you to become more disciplined. Maybe it isn't asking you to optimize your morning. Maybe it isn't asking you to wake up earlier, work harder, organize better, or become more efficient. Maybe some part of you has simply been waiting for you to notice what you've been carrying. And that is a very different kind of exhaustion. Because if your energy were truly gone, there would be nothing to recover. But what if it isn't gone? What if it has been tied up, allocated, committed, given to things that have been waiting for an ending? And maybe that is why certain moments of clarity feel so strangely physical. The breath you didn't realize you were holding. The tension that disappears after you finally say what you meant. The lightness after you make a decision you've been postponing for months. The strange quiet after you stop checking whether someone will come back. The afternoon when you finally admit that the dream you abandoned was never really dead. The morning when you wake up and realize that something you've carried for years is no longer asking to be carried. Nothing external may have changed, and yet you have more of yourself available. That's the part I want you to remember. The energy you've been looking for may not be gone. It may have been allocated to things that have been waiting for you to finally turn toward them. And turning toward them even once, even briefly, begins to give it back. Maybe you don't need more energy. Maybe you need less of your energy somewhere else. And maybe the life you've been waiting to have isn't waiting for you to become stronger. Maybe it's waiting for you to stop carrying what no longer needs to come with you. If this reached you in some way, stay close. Subscribe. We're in this together.